This is the Mission Shaped Podcast. You're listening to The Author's Take.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you are well this Monday lunchtime. For those of you who don't know, my name is Tim Lee. I work for the National Fresh Expressions team here in the UK, kind of have responsibility for networking. If you've not heard of Fresh Expressions, go and have a look at the website. But we are committed to joining in with what it is that God is already doing. And I'm delighted to welcome Ian Mobsby here to us today. Ian, it is great to have you here. I was trying to think back actually when it was that you and I kind of first connected. And it must have been, probably must be 10, 15 years ago in terms of our kind of conversation. But it's great to have you here. Are you good?
Yes, Tim. Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
So you and I got to know each other in the very early days of kind of Fresh Expressions. I think both of us were kind of practitioners, trying to work it out, making it up as we go along. And I remember particularly you had a sense of Ute was the community which you were involved with in London. You've gone on and done different things now. In recent years, you and I have been involved in kind of encouraging the prayer life of people. And during lockdown, we ran, it must have been 6 or 7 communities, 10-step programs, learning from the 10-step tradition of Alcoholics Anonymous. I know you moved recently. Whereabouts are you? Well, I think you're in London today, but work-wise, you've moved, I think. Is that right?
Yes. No, I work now in the Anglican Diocese of Niagara, where I've become a diocesan missioner. So mixture of practitioner and supporter of a load of missioners, although missioners stroke pioneers in Canada. And it's significantly cold. I'm quite glad I'm here in London because it's minus 25 in Niagara today. So it's a bit rather than in Canada.
Brilliant. So the book that you have been involved in writing is called The Seeking Heart, with a line of a contemplative approach to mission and pioneering. So we're going to go straight in. So just tell us some fun facts about yourself and what is it that you love doing?
So people don't know this, but because I'm possibly the most unscientific person you will meet. But my grandfather was a big scientist who came up with a special formula for making sure that lenses on telescopes are accurate. So there would not be a Hubble telescope if it wasn't for my grandfather. And the other thing I'm quite proud of, this accent sounds very English, but I'm very pleased to say I'm 50% Welsh, 50% Scandinavian, or as my father calls it, double Viking. So good for you.
I don't think I knew either of those things about you, but correct. So this book that you wrote, The Seeking Heart, what was it that inspired you to write this?
Well, I've been a missioner stroke pioneer now, started off as a lay and then ordained for 31 years. And in all of that time, I became increasingly interested in the number of unchurched spiritual seekers there were. And that grew. So as I grew into doing kind of new monastic Fresh Expressions, increasing awareness that this was a growing group of people. So my inspiration was really, who are these spiritual seekers? And particularly this new group, the spiritual but not religious. And then how do we respond to that? And, when many people were they were questing for spirituality. So the book then was very inspired. How do we open up Christian spirituality to those who are spiritually seeking? And actually, how do we live it? How do we live with a deep Christian spirituality relevant for today?
And that term, spiritual but not religious, that feels like it's a kind of an academic term. What does it mean?
Well, it's quite contentious as spiritual but not religious. There's some quite famous theologians who are quite negative about it, but I think it is a legitimate social grouping, and they are people who quest for spiritual experience. They're looking for meaning, but don't relate to traditional Christianity or any religion. And I think they're part of this thing called a post-secular culture, where and that creates the conditions that we see all these new spiritual seekers. So that was that's what I think a spiritual not religious is. They are really questioning, love drawing on all sorts of spiritual traditions, but they don't join in with church or synagogues or anywhere. They're very much about trying to journey on their own spiritual journey.
Okay, great. So talk to us about, what's the main thread or method of the seeking heart? And why the seeking heart? It's a fascinating kind of, high.
Well, I think it's a seeking heart because I think, what is contemplation? But that's, I'll talk about that a bit later. But so the motivation for the book is in two halves. Well, firstly, who are these spiritual or religious? And then the second, and that's looking at this kind of trying to understand really practically what's the motivations, the ideas of these spiritual, not religious. So the first book is coming out of that research. And the second part of that was what is a Christian response that's drawing on a more contemplative model, and therefore try to open up Christian contemplative resources to those who are spiritually seeking. So that's the two halves of the book. And the very final bit was, once people start asking religious questions following the fresh expressions process, how do you respond to that? So then I open up a way of creating how you curate opportunities for people to explore Christianity in a way that's really meaningful and on their terms. So that's what the book's all about.
Okay, great, fantastic. So, and is this born out of theory? Is it born out of your practice? Is this just something that is just a good idea, or where's this coming from for you? If you like, what's at the heart of it for you?
Well, this all began when I was in this new monastic community called Moot in the city of London, working with some colleagues, where we set up two things: a meditation group, a missional meditation group opening up Christian spirituality through an adapted John Main approach. And also alongside that, something that started off being called Serum that grew into Searching Soul, which was an opportunity for spiritual dialogue. And these were really, really significant. And I think for me, they kind of opened me up to this being a really important area that was quite neglected. And I didn't really know anybody who was using this kind of combination of meditation and dialogue as a way of being missional with spiritual seekers. So that's why I got really interested in it. And I think it's been very important for my own Christian life. And the sense of, the contemplative tradition is really, really important and somewhat underplayed. So that was a very important part for my own spiritual growth.
And I mean, personally, as someone who also has a call to be a contemplative on their life, I think that's where often our paths have crossed, and we've had a number of really interesting conversations about what that means. So you talk about, the use of the contemplative tradition or a contemplative approach to mission and pioneering. So how do you understand that word contemplative?
Good question. I think there's two really important themes. Firstly, contemplative says that actually, the encounter of God, our prayer life, how we relate to God and encounter of God matters. And particularly ones where we are letting go, where it's all about silence. How do we meet God that speaks from within just as much as from without? So there's all these so I've been very inspired. We've got 2,000 years of resources of different prayer traditions. And for me, the kind of Benedictine, Franciscan, Ignatian, and Carmelite forms of prayer being deeply resourcing about how to live today. So I think there's something about these really ancient prayer practices that are deeply resonant now. I think the other part, which is really important, is that the contemplative tradition says that it says something about human nature and our identity, that actually as human becomings, rather than human beings, that we have an interior life. There is this sense that our true self is an interior self that we can only really discover through God. And Thomas Merton writes quite a lot about that. And I think we live in a world that exists at the surface of itself. And we certainly see that with all that's going on in the world and in politics, the ego and the false self. And how that's, you define yourself by power and achievement, and that's very egoic things. Well, the contemporary tradition says, well, that's all false. That's not real. And actually the true self is that inner landscape is incredibly important. And I think the church, to be honest, sometimes exists too much at the outside of itself. And actually in conversion, if we're talking about mission, then it's that interior self, the discovery of God that speaks from within, the self that's transformed through the love of God and encounter of God is incredibly important. So I've needed that as an individual, really. It's kind of saved my life discovering that. I'm not sure I would have been able to sustain being a Christian in the complexity of the world without it. And it's deeply relevant for those who are called to mission and opening up the Christian tradition for those who are spiritually seeking, right? Because many people have no idea who they are. And there's something about opening up Christianity to help people go much deeper in who they are in God.
So just let me get this. Does this mean then that actually, if, the kingdom of heaven is within us, and that actually there is, for too long, we've thought that actually it was external to us, and that interior journey is about discovering the love of God, which is within each one of us? Have I got that? Got that right?
Yes, I think because if you look at culture, we're still coming out of the Enlightenment of modernity, which is all about rationalism and thinking. And we'd forgotten that Jesus talked about the heart being the organ of faith. And the heart is all about that inner landscape, about that inner being. And so, yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think that faith, Christianity starts from within. And the church, I think we're still in recovery from this idea that we suddenly have to have everything worked out in terms of thinking and words. But actually, is all about encounter of God, and that's got to be from within. And I think the deeper you go in Christianity, the more you need to go deeper into prayer and deeper into God that you discover from within.
And you would say that is about silence and about solitude, and connecting with the other.
Yes. I think it's critical in a world where we are, I've met people who are terrified about being silent, because when you're silent, you have to face who you really are. You're naked before God, right? We fill our lives with technology and avoidance. And we use noise, and it's very almost, that God that speaks with a still small voice needs space to be encountered. And I think people are terrified about looking inwards, or the inner journey, because we live in a culture that is driven by a market society, which is all about, success, ego, shopping, and consumerism, that avoids that inner journey at all costs. So I think I think we have a mental health crisis as well as a political crisis, an ecological crisis. I think Thomas Merton is utterly right, because many people are avoiding that inner journey. And Jesus was all about that inner journey. And he lived out that profound way of life as a disciple, of kind of silent prayer, encounter of God, and then action, prayer and action. And my experience of Christianity is it's very little prayer and a lot of action.
And that's, I was going to say, and that's really interesting, if you like, because, it kind of takes us into the next question, which is, most of us who've been involved with Fresh Expressions, new worshiping communities, pioneering, however it is that we like to talk about it, have been or still are activists who, and I know, because I think about it myself, is that often it's only been about the top 6 inches. It's only been about what knowledge is it that somebody needs to know. And actually what you're saying is that that's not so important as the interior journey and what it is that God's saying to us inside. And if you like, you argue very strongly in the book that actually we've taken on the sacred secular divide and have effectively said that Christianity is just about information or knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually you're saying something very different.
Yeah.
That actually it's far more holistic. It's far more about our hearts. Have I got that right in terms of?
Yeah, totally. So, so much of mission, sometimes I felt guilty as a missioner, that I'm not, sometimes we feel the pressure to be like secondhand car salesman, trying to force people or manipulate people or have the perfect argument as if facts for Jesus enables people to find Christianity. I fundamentally don't believe that. The gospel stories of Jesus and of, the disciples and the apostles were all about people having transformative experience of God and of Jesus. So this, I think it's Karl Rahner predicted that he said the Christian of the future would be a mystic or they will not exist at all. And I think that's absolutely right. That actually there's something about opening up, this depth, that we have to live with this depth of God. Our prayer practices, the way we live as a rhythm based on the encounter of God is critical. And then inviting people to join on that pilgrimage towards God is I think really important. So yeah, we need to get away for, the idea that conversion is about facts about God to encounter of God. And that has to be around prayer. And people are spiritually hungry, right? There's lots of unchurched spiritual seekers who are desperately searching for meaning. They see the market society collapsing around our ears. Materialism never delivered any sense of depth and security. And people are desperate, they're asking that question, then how shall we live? So it's not about, but just about belief now. It's about a whole way. How do we live? How do we know who we are? How do we live as fulfilled human beings? And I believe that can only come from a depth of contemplation that drives us into action. That false dichotomy. If you're really deep in God in prayer, then it leads you to that relational mission, that depth of Christ. And then our lives then become moments of seeking to serve God through being curators of opportunities for people to encounter God. It's so critical. And I think too much of my life I was running around like a headless chicken, trying to run all sorts of things for people, where I was like living at the surface. And guess what? It was utterly unsustainable and really didn't serve God in terms of mission. And I love the contemplative idea of mission. So rather than mission all being about just conversion, mission is actually about God restoring all things back into right relationship with God. Is that 2 Corinthians 4 and 5 image, which then is deeply transformational and so exciting, So it's less about secondhand car person, more about being deep disciples in God. I feel much.
And that means, and if you like that then goes to the heart of our kind of Christology, if you like, as to, the whole of the world, not just individual personal salvation.
Yes.
The whole of the world is being reconciled with all of the ecological implications that brings.
And the other part of that, which you're absolutely right, Tim, is then that everybody is on their own unique pilgrimage. And I do believe that God is pouring out God's love into the world, seeking to, draw people to the God side, that centered set way of thinking about mission that is seeking for people to respond to. So there is this sense of that God is not absent in the world, but trust that we have called to trust that God is doing God's mission as part of that restorative healing process. And our job then is to get out of the way of God, I think, so often, and to just help people and encourage people to go on that journey and learn to trust and lean into encounter of God.
And I'm just thinking that ties in completely with, if you like, Fresh Expressions has always been about the Missio Dei. God is at work in the world, and our role and our task is to discern and to discover where it is in the most surprising of places. And if you're like, what you're saying is that actually that begins with a contemplative journey.
Yeah, I think it does.
Flows into what that then means in that place where you meet the spiritual but not religious, but anybody, actually.
Yes.
Anybody. Yeah, and it feels like it's almost that kind of question I find myself asking, do I actually really believe that God is at work in the world?
Yeah. And that's a daily battle.
Yeah.
And I think the contemplative tradition says a rhythm of daily encounter of God, receiving the love of God. To learn to love yourself, to be able to love others is critical. Otherwise, I don't know about you, but my default position often is anxiety and fear. And if I don't pray and encountering God, then my whole worldview for that day is about scarcity and survival. But if I pray and I allow this space to encounter God, it utterly transforms the way I think and act. So that has to be a daily discipline to live that way. And I think as Christians, we're not always good at being prayerful. We think, all the emphasis is on doing. Well, actually, we forget that doing without being in God is just, that's what are people going to see? So only when I think I live out this depth does it become attractive and invitational to others.
Okay. And so in the book, I know that it's born out of some research which you did in terms of, with this group, spiritual but not religious. We've talked a little bit about what that means and how we understand that. But what is interesting all the way through the book, which is the stories which you tell about those people. So is there a particular story which, has been really important for you or has been a key story? Would you share that with us?
Yeah, very happy to. So there are 32 stories, which was, remarkable to accompany through that. A key one for me was a guy who started out as an atheist, which is my family background and where I was actually when I was much younger. So he was like in his 30s, been working in IT, radical atheist, and then got depressed. So he went to see his therapist about that. And the whole issue of spirituality, which didn't exist, right? So it's all, it's all rationality. Yeah. So he almost got to a place where he had to disbelieve that whole rational thing and give room for the spiritual. And he did some research. So I think he started going off to a Buddhist center for meditation and turned up at one of these missional meditation groups that we were running in the city. And then he joined in with that and joined in with that very reliably because he experienced it to work. The meditation thing opened up spirituality and Christian spirituality. So on the back of that, he then joined the dialogue group and then started to explore, and then, started off with a very negative stereotype about Christianity in the church, but then grew to being a bit more open and then started asking religious questions in this dialogue group. And so, through a number, it doesn't happen quickly, but, in the sense of that time, he then started to put down feelers with the fresh expression that I was involved in at the time, and then grew into exploring it. And he said, I quite like you as Christians, as long as you're not those bonkers fundamentalists over there, I can cope with you. And I can grow into that. So then on the back of that, he came to faith. He chose to follow Christ after going through these various stages of formation, with lots of little eureka moments on that journey to the point where he felt ready to be baptized and then got involved and is now, got involved in a Christian church on the back of that. So for me, that was amazing. And I think that where he was, and where the church were, as its classic fresh expressions, that there's something about this approach then joined that helped that missional journey to happen, and for him to become a Christian, which was a delight.
So you talked about this kind of contemplative community. So how do you host one of those? Because, often as Christians, well, let's face it, we're pretty good at trying to shoehorn people in or tell them what it is that they should believe or should practice. How do you host that kind of space?
Well, there's different ways of doing it. There's no one way, I would say. I mean, one way is through new monasticism, but that's not right everywhere. That's a particular form of fresh expressions that has strengths and weaknesses. Other ways, I think, is about so if you're in a parish church context and you want to be more missional, how could you run a contemplative prayer group? How do you have a space for this where people could be very committed to the regularity of some sort of missional meditation group and dialogue group? I think the other thing is, thinking about, I'm an Anglican, right? So we forget that Anglican prayer practices draw off from monastic prayer practices. The Book of Common Prayer came out of the monastic tradition. So actually it is possible to open up morning and evening prayer and compline in very contemplative ways. You just got to give less words and more silence. So you can actually draw on these traditions to be very contemplative. And I think that then creates the culture of the importance of contemplative prayer built into the DNA of whether it's a parish church, a fresh expression, or whatever you're doing. So I don't think, you don't have to be new monastic to do this work. I think you just got to have an openness to the incredible amount of spiritual seekers out there and those that call themselves spiritual, not religious as a subset, And then thinking, well, how could you serve people in their spiritual journey? And I mean, running a meditation group doesn't get any easier. You know, you do an introduction, you're silent for 20 minutes, you tell people what to do, and then you do an ending. That's it. So, you know, it's not a challenge Annika sort of activity.
So what you're saying is that to be more missional, we need to be more silent.
Yeah. We have to have room for stillness. And you know, the other thing that someone said to me once, and I won't tell you who it was, it said, you've got to be an introvert to be contemplative. I fundamentally disagree. I'm a ridiculously extrovert person. I need it. I need silence around me in the reality to get out of my head into the reality of the world and the reality of who I am. Right. So that's critical, I think, to think that way.
And it also goes, it really goes against that kind of whole who's in control.
Exactly.
And where the primary agency resides, that it's not us. The primary agency is God, and dare we entertain 20 minutes of silence to let God get a word in edgeways almost.
Exactly. We're so impoverished. So, you know, so there's something about us as individual Christians in this book. And there's also something about a confidence into a particular more contemplative model of mission. And they go hand in hand.
Okay. And I know towards the end of the book, there are some ways in which you can host these kind of spaces and what that looks like. And you provide some helpful liturgy as well, and some prayers. So that, again, people can buy the book and read about that. But also, if you like, actually, you know, try it themselves, give it a whirl, because it's possible. So just tell me then, you know, what is it arising out of this book that, you know, people should really grab a hold of? What is it that, you know, if people are listening today, what is it that you're really hoping they will take away from this?
Well, one is, I think, about more contemplative understanding of the spiritual journey. I mean, I don't know about you, but no one ever told me that there were these stages of awakening, purgation, illumination, and union. Okay. And for me, they're critical stages in becoming Christian, and also critical stages of growing into Christianity. They don't stop, but these cycles of, you know, awakening, purgation, illumination, union. And so just to unpack that a little bit. So what I do say.
Those sound like deeply theological words, which I'm not quite sure I understand. But Ian, just tell us a little bit more about those words.
Well, I think awakening is about when people are stirred to the reality of God. So that story I told, that was stirred through some form of therapy. It could be anything where people have some sort of stirring. And then purgation is when you suddenly realize that you are broken. And then suddenly, you know, we have so many attachments. We live in a very unhealthy way in a market society, that you suddenly are, you know, we carry wounds and pains of our life experiences, and quite quickly they catch up with us. And then so as people hit purgation, which is a painful stage, then you have to kind of encounter God to get through that, which is called illumination, which is where you let go, that, you know, those prayer practices of surrender, to let go of all those attachments and disappointments and wounds to seek healing, that lead then to the idea that people become in Christ, become Christians. And by doing that, they're stepping into union, which is about a deeper and full relationship with God and the Trinity. So those are the critical lives that, you know, you start from this place of awakening that leads to these stages to becoming Christian in Christ. And that is a pilgrimage. And we forgot again that actually pilgrimages aren't just for the Christian, but for those who are spiritually exploring, right? So prayer and this missional journey then become a way of opening up mission and evangelism in a very indirect, non-directive way. So that's the first big one I want to say. The second thing is, too many Christians and in church are totally unaware that we're in a post-secular culture. And that we're increasingly seeing large numbers of unchurched spiritual seekers. And I'm always shocked about how many places have no idea that's going on. So I think first to notice that in your neighborhood, and this book then shares some resources about how you approach it. A, how do you understand it? And two, how do you respond to it? So that's the second big thing. And I think the third one is, I think this stuff is incredibly exciting. I've spent most of my church life feeling guilty I'm not doing enough. And suddenly you've got a whole approach that says, well, actually, I'm going to curate these opportunities in the expectation that God will do what God will do. And I just have to get out of the way. And just like Philip was with the Ethiopian eunuch, responding to what God is doing, well, that's just a delight. I love that way of working. So even now, when I'm in Hamilton in Ontario, there is a group called Hamilton Well, where it's called Beer and Meditation and Beer. So they have meditation and go for a beer. They've got 200 members, unchurched people who are signed up to that. You don't get 200 every time, but the very fact that there's a meetup group that's got 200 people of it, I think says loads. It's only been there for 9 months. And it's got 200 members. That's really exciting. So those are the things I think it offers. Let's get real with the world that we live in and respond to it. And wake up to the fact that, fresh expressions and all this kind of missional purpose means that we just have to be engaged with these kind of spiritual, but not religious. And if you really look, they're there.
And so, you appear to be fundamentally saying, this is a way in which we can engage missionally.
Yeah. And works. We're struggling, with the churches de-churching. We're struggling with the relationship with church and culture. And we find ourselves in a new pluralistic age where people are interested in Christianity. They're desperately searching for meaning, but they don't trust institutions. They don't trust anything that seems to be controlling. And interestingly, they're not interested in product. We've relied on, I think, a lot of some of the more recent initiatives try to sell church as a product with the beautiful people at the front, and then we all fall in line with the right videos and everything. No, people don't want that. They want authenticity, and they want things that work for them on their terms and their spiritual journey. And that isn't a threat. It means that we just have to stop. You get back to this. This is the heart of Christianity. This isn't new. This was monastic mystics have been banging on about for a very long time. So I think leaning into that and getting away from this kind of managerialism that I kind of encounter often in the church is critical. So that needs deep discipleship that opens up deep mission, and prayer and contemplation is part of that journey.
Ian, thank you. Thank you for your honesty. I'm aware of, having been in conversation with you, that it's not always been an easy journey.
I don't think anybody, mission or pioneering has an easy life. We're in the industry of not fitting in, where it's all this trouble. This approach that I can sustain, I've been doing this now for 31 years, was a bit of a shock. So I'm now like 57, and I started off this journey 20 something. And there's only this depth of prayer and contemplation that all this stuff. And I'm so excited about this book because it's just the naming of all this stuff that I've learned along the way, plus some PhD research. So, and I know how many missioners and pioneers are struggling. And I think this is a resource, I hope, that will help make mission and pioneering much more sustainable and life-giving. Just will fit I think, in lots of different contexts.
Ian, thank you so much for your vulnerability. And if you like, there's so much of you in this story, but also there's an academic rigor and some research behind this, which says exactly what you said. The God that we believe in, it works.
Exactly.
And thank you so much for your time today. And we wish you well in your seeking heart. So thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
So the book is available at The Seeking Heart, A Contemplative Approach to Mission and Pioneering by Ian Mobsby. It's available in the shop, which you can see there on the screen, or in the other. Is it the other place that it's available?
This is SCM Press in the UK. There are a number of different outlets in North America as well, because I'm a few people watching from there. So it is available. It came out 2 weeks ago. So Right, so it's hot off the press.
Literally.
And if you get that order before the end of the month, before the 31st of January, you get 20% off with SCM Press.
Brilliant. Great. Ian, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you want to dig a bit deeper, there's loads over at freshexpressions.org.uk. Things like Godsend, our toolkit for starting new Christian communities, plus loads of other resources, worship ideas, and real-life stories. You'll also find info about the gatherings we run throughout the year, books and resources in our shop, coaching and training for pioneers, and for the leaders across denominations, dioceses, and networks. You can sign up to our newsletter, follow us on our socials, or find out how to support and partner with us. It's all there on the website. Go take a look, freshexpressions.org.uk.